So I had a horror story with a Dodge. I've always liked the Dodge Ram truck from I want to say 93, 94 to like 2001, 2002. Other people talk crap about it because of the transmissions and stuff, but I love them. They're so easy to work on, so easy to pull the trans, pull the motor, a lot of space. The only thing I didn't like about that series Dodge Ram was what they call that half keg intake, because the bottom of the intake manifold just had like a paper thin 22 gauge piece of sheet metal bolted to the bottom of it, and they would use like a paper style gasket, and eventually that oil in the valley would saturate that gasket and it would blow out under vacuum. It would crack, and during different load cycles, that intake manifold could pull oil up inside that gasket and then circulate it back into your engine, and then you'd get burning oil. Oil would drop all the time. My first Dodge Ram that I bought was a 95 long wheelbase. Pulled it out of Arkansas. The rear end was going in it. Me and my uncle put a new rear end in it, got the truck up and running real good. I probably put 70,000 miles on this truck before I sold it to a guy that was doing granite countertops. He ended up running that truck for a few more years. I actually seen him in Chicago doing one of his jobs, and I wanted the truck back because they had it painted. They actually took it to a body shop and had everything painted. That truck, I ended up having to get a Mopar kit from a company, I think it's in Washington, Illinois. It's like a Mopar warehouse place, and they give you an upgraded quarter-inch aluminum plate. It's like an eighth inch or a quarter-inch aluminum plate, new bolts, a new like metal-based rubber-coated gasket to stop that problem from happening. And it was like $149.99 for the kit, and it probably took me a couple hours, 2.5, 3 hours or something like that to do it. And I got everything bolted back up. That motor never ate oil again. That was my first problem with that Dodge Ram. And then later on, I bought another one. I bought a 2001 Dodge Ram Sport, cheap two-wheel drive truck. They wanted like nothing for it, and it was rusted out all over the place, but it ran strong. And it was just, I could tell it was burning a smidge of oil, because like every 500 to 1,000 miles, it'd be like half a quart low. So I was okay with that. I still have that truck now. Over the last 2 years, I've cut out every single panel and ordered all new metal to weld in, and went around that whole entire truck and welded in all new sheet metal, got rid of all that stuff, went through the motor. I have videos on this stuff too, but I put a new AC condenser in it, new water pump in it, new belts, new pulleys, all new Freon and stuff, pulled the dash, put a new heater core and everything in this thing, and just basically went through it and freshened up as much as I possibly could. Now, granted, it's still a work truck, and the whole entire truck is Rhino lined. I only use it, and I beat the living hell out of it, and it just keeps running and running and running. But I ran into a problem, and I chased my ass on it because I'm not a Dodge tech, and I didn't have access to it. It was a weekend. It was Friday after work. I worked late, and I was driving home at about 75 mile an hour. All of a sudden, the truck, I'm going along. It's got a Flowmaster on it. Down the interstate, and it would pull off to the side of the road. Cranking. It would fire and then it would die. It would fire and then it would die. It would fire and it would die. And it did this for over an hour. And I couldn't get it to crank back up. So I ended up having it towed down to the O'Reilly down the road. And I couldn't get the thing to fire there in the parking lot. I thought for sure I could figure it out. I thought maybe a crank sensor went out, so I replaced the crank sensor. I didn't have anything on me. I replaced the crank sensor. That wasn't it. I pulled the distributor cap and replaced the magnetic pickup. That wasn't it. I put a new cap on it and cleaned up the rotor and stuff. Eventually ended up putting a new rotor under the distributor cap. That wasn't it. Checked the plugs and wires. That wasn't it. Made sure I was getting ample fuel. Bought a fuel gauge there, and they had the old screw-on port. I'm still getting plenty of pressure, like 40 pounds of pressure or something like that. 45 pounds. And it still wouldn't fire. I couldn't get this thing to fire at all. And then I called the tow truck again, and a guy I knew, because we use him so much because I work at the dealership, I says, hey, can you tow this thing back to the dealership? I'll have to work on it tomorrow. So I get it to the dealership, and I thought, you know what? I don't honestly know what this problem is. I'm just going to go through it and replace every fuel and ignition component and just freshen it all up from front to back. So I put it on the diesel tech wasn't in, so I went to his big lift, his like 20,000 pound lift, put the truck up on that because I knew nobody would need it, downed it for the whole entire day, pulled the fuel cell out of it, put a fuel pump in it, noticed that my fuel tank strap was about to break, so I put brand new fuel straps in it, ran new fuel lines all the way up, went through this thing meticulously to replace every component, the ignition coil that sits on that front bracket on the front of the motors. I thought maybe that's bad because some of them get hot and then eventually they go out, or they intermittently will, like you'll get into a drive and you'll drive like 25, 30 miles. I had one back in the day that I had, it was a 98. I could drive about 30 miles and then all of a sudden it would die, and then you'd have to wait like an hour to start it back up, and then you'd have just enough time to get back home before it'd start to act up and die again. And that ended up being an ignition coil. So I thought maybe that was the issue with this too, but I just replaced it. I mean, I was losing my mind, and I was dropping the professional side of what I do because I didn't know that particular Dodge like I thought I did. I chased everything, and then I got to thinking about it, and I said, I wonder if this thing has a computer issue. And I noticed that it was some kind of like message that would pop up on the screen every once in a while that would say something bus something or whatever, like something was wrong with the communication as well. So I thought, why didn't I notice this little small message over in the corner that would pop up from time to time? I never paid attention to it. Maybe something's going on with the computer. My neighbor had a four-wheel drive 360 short wheelbase Dodge Ram, and I said, would you mind if I took the computer out of that thing? He never used it. He was trying to sell it. He hated the truck. He just didn't like Dodges. He bought it as a beater, but then realized he didn't want to put the money into it. So I took the computer out of it and I stuck it in my Dodge, fired it right up. It was a four-wheel drive, so there was like a trans temp sensor that was the difference between his and mine, but it was just a trans temp code that would pop up because it wasn't seeing what it wanted to see on his particular version versus mine. But it fired right up. Started the truck, drove it for another week, sent that computer off to New York. There was a company that refurbishes them there for like $159.99 and gives you a lifetime warranty. And then I bought another backup computer that goes with it, stuck it in the vehicle, programmed in my truck. It's been running since then. Beat the living hell out of this thing, run it, work it every single day if I need to. It just sits in the lot at work. I only use it for work, or maybe another coworker or friend or somebody needs it. I probably, between the body work, the painting, and all, like going through this whole entire thing from front to back, every component in it's brand new. I probably have somewhere close to $3,000, $3,500 in parts, and then who knows all the hours and stuff that I put into it to get this thing running right. All new shocks all the way around, pitman arm, wheel bearings up front, easiest wheel bearings ever on those Dodges. It's like, I think it's like a 27 millimeter nut or something like that. You just zip that thing off and then pop the wheel bearing off, put a new one on, and zip it back on. It was super, super easy to do. It's like a hub assembly, and it's been running ever since. But my problem was after jumping on the Dodge forums and looking to see what all the guys were experiencing with that same just out of nowhere condition, driving on the highway and just dies with no like warning or sluggishness. I should have went on the forum first. I should have went online and actually did some research instead of just throwing stuff at this vehicle, because I was stressed out and I was falling apart. It was my own personal vehicle, and I was at the same time trying to justify putting all these new parts in the vehicle, and I really didn't need it. But everything's brand new within the last year. I mean, every single component on that truck is new. So I'll probably never get rid of that truck because I'll never get my money back out of that truck, and it runs really well. But it ended up being the ignition coil driver in the computer. And I was reading on the Dodge forum that those year Dodges from like 96 or something like that to like 2001, it was a notorious problem for all of a sudden it just dying on you and it wouldn't come back. And Dodge was putting in computers in these trucks all the time, and I had no idea. I wouldn't think that an ignition coil driver in a computer would just drop out like that and just be done, but it was a common problem. So that's my horror story with my 90, what is that, what year body style that changed, like 94, 95, I think 94 to 2001 Dodge Ram. Just thought I'd share that with you guys because I know some of you guys like this kind of stuff.